Welcome to another episode of From Shadows to Strength podcast. I am your host, Tyson, along with my guest, Casper Vatras. If you've not already done so, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. So today we're going to be listening to Casper again. I'm glad he's back with us. He's going to continue on with his take of therapy. And here he's going to be talking about behavioral issues. So behavioral issues, we've got depression, anxiety. Those are going to be the two we're going to cover today. Yes, there are other things, and we're going to say that for yet another podcast episode later in the future. But today, like I said, it's going to be about depression, anxiety, and I think those are two we need to cover because pretty much everyone I've ever worked with, myself included, my family included, suffer with these two things. So, Casper, I'm opening up the floor to you. Please talk to us about some of the reasons why we struggle with depression and anxiety.
So thank you. And thank you for having me on again. Depression and anxiety, like ubiquitous. Everybody's got them and everybody experiences them at different times. And I hope that in our first video, which I strongly recommend everybody listen to, you're not going to understand today's episode if you have not watched the previous episode. I hope I've made a really good case for why they exist and why they occur, why they can often be very natural processes. And today we're going to be talking about how they can become pathological. So first I want to note, in our previous talk, we were talking about beliefs, we were talking about stressors, and I don't want to make it seem like, with this stress self-care axis that I was referring to before, that stressors can be as simple as, I have an infection or my girlfriend broke up with me, which it can be all those things, those physiological and social stressors. But a lot of what people find everyone will find that what contributes to so much of their stress are the way that they see things or what they see in certain things. This is to say, the beliefs that they might have. Imagine how much more processing would have to be done by an individual, how much more stressed out they would be. If they hold beliefs like I'm stupid or the world is bad or the world is going to end. If we consume so much social media and war correspondence and all this other stuff, and our subconscious, our brain is really churning on, threat, stressor everywhere. I need to worry about this. I need to worry about this, We might say, well, I don't believe any of that stuff, but our brain does. And our brain may have formed maladaptive beliefs, and then those contribute so heavily to our stressors. I'm trying to think of an example, but, I might have an individual who finds that they just can't relax. They can't sit still. When they play games, they don't feel like they can relax. They feel kind of stressed out. They always feel like something needs to get done. They might hold a belief. That's to say, they might hold like a subconscious heuristic that their brain has picked up over time that, well, let's see where it might come from. Say you have a dad who calls you lazy over and over and over, or they punish you whenever you find video games, or they make you feel guilty for playing video games all the time. Your brain would make associations over and over and over again. Video games, stressful, not doing something productive, lazy, just bad. So these associations that his brain has learned from these previous experiences would be an explanation for why he has all of these behaviors, all these feelings, and why he'd be under so much stress. These connections that his brain have made, they're not necessarily rational, but his brain made them. That's one of the big issues here. Now, it's times like in this example where other people say, just relax, just chill out. And the person says, I rationally know I can do this. And yet the brain is not allowing them to. It'll make them feel guilty or shitty or whatever else. In fact, another great example of this, and usually I say this quite early on in working with clients when I talk about beliefs, perfectionism. Through experiences like, a parent saying, oh, you got an A, why not an A+? Or you cleaned your room, and then, what about this? Why isn't this clean? Or why isn't that? Where parents say, you have to work harder, you need to do more, you got to do better. When we're young when we're children, let's say, and our brains are very neuroplastic, so say our brains are making associations at insane rates, our brains might learn different things, some good, some bad, some adaptive, some maladaptive, such as hard work, good. Being productive, good. Better, good. More, better. I got to keep going. Nothing is ever good enough. I must try harder. And in some parts of life, this can be great, that it pushes you to work harder and harder. But then what happens, and this is where I start seeing this in my practice, what happens when you start to see this in adults and they've got everything? A very classical example I have, a very classical archetype of client I have is the client who says, Casper, I've got everything. I've got the wife, I've got the kids, I've got a great job, I've got more money than I know what to do with. I've got lots of friends. Why am I not happy? And that seems like such a nebulous question at first. Happiness, what is happiness? And why wouldn't they be happy when they have all these things? And like 95% of the time, very rough, arbitrary percentage here, but the vast majority of the time, why wouldn't you be happy when you have all those things? And what I'll so often find 95% of the time is they need more. They want more. They have this belief of perfectionism that nothing is ever good enough. Therefore, I need to do more. I need to do better. And it served them for so long. And now the second edge of that double-edged sword is coming back to bite them. Now they're finding diminishing returns as they get older and older. And they've run out of staircase to keep climbing. It takes so much more effort to make an extra $100,000, and they've already got a few $1,000,000 coming in every year. Who cares? And they might say that to themselves, rationally, critically, mind-based. I don't care. I just want to be happy. And yet their brain is not allowing them to be content or to be happy. Excuse me. Beliefs, just as a little recap, as a preamble, our brain makes associations all the time, and it makes some connections better or worse, rational or irrational, and we kind of have to live with them. These are the demons that we talk about. Everyone's got their demons. Sometimes it's shit like that, stuff like that. So I want to note that there is a lot of complexity to this stuff. Even though last session, excuse me, that's the language I usually use. In our last video, it might have seemed a little simplistic. There is a whole level of software, of associations our brain makes, of experiential associations. This is what we're going to be calling beliefs a lot of the time. But first, on the behavioral level. So we talked about, well, actually, it feels rude to say all that stuff and not let you get a chance at that. What do you think about that? Beliefs and all that?
No, I mean, everything you're saying makes sense. I think the one thing where I take, and again, this is not from a clinical, right? You're very much from that clinical, much more book smart than myself. I'm more of the practical, what I've learned. And when you talk about that pursuit of happiness, definitely can relate to it, right? We always want more. We're in a instead of having an abundance mindset, right? We create a scarcity mindset, and we're hoarding resources. Need more, and eventually we have no more mountains to climb and no more mountains to conquer. We've done them all, and we wonder why we feel unfulfilled. And where I kind of learned in my life experience is stop chasing and pursuing happiness and start pursuing peace. And in doing so, you find happiness and fulfillment because you realize it's not the car you drive, it's not the house you buy, it's not the clothes you wear, it's not the $700 pair of headphones that you have on your head that signal success. It's who you are and who you share your life with, in my opinion, that dictates true success. And my success is in, I would say my greatest success, my greatest achievement is my wife. Because I met her and she fell in love with me when I had nothing more than my heart to offer. But I was also in a pretty simple place in my life when I met her, when I was incarcerated, right? And I was just trying to find peace in a very rough environment. So I think that's kind of my take on what you just said is
Sure.
the pursuit of happiness is really just in finding your purpose, finding your peace. There's so much happiness in that.
You set me up in such a nice way, and I believe a lot of the things you're saying are true. But in the clinical application, these people are stuck. They can say, "I believe everything you're saying," And I believe it and I want to act that way, but I just continue to have these feelings. And I find myself behaving in a way that might be counter to that or different than that. Again, we're talking about this dichotomy, or there's a distinction. There are two different parts of your brain that work so completely differently. We can know that, this type of woman is bad for me. And yet we keep going for that type of woman over and over and over again. We can know that, I shouldn't overshoot in my training. And then we keep doing it over and over. What's leading us to engage in that behavior? Again, if we rationally, mind-based, if we are not choosing to engage in some kind of behavior, that's to say, we see ourselves drinking more than we want to. We see ourselves screaming and yelling when we don't want to. We're smiling at something that doesn't align with what our beliefs. Why am I smiling at that? The only question we've got here is, why would my brain be doing that? Where would it come up with that? And I'm trying to really form the heuristics for how your brain works. And that's, again, what I talked about a lot in that first session. So beliefs get complex because there's a lot of different variables coming in. There's that good evolutionary stuff of like, why would my brain, nuts and bolts, base level, why is this good or bad or whatever? But then our brains can learn all kinds of different stuff that, and this is the experiential, the software level is where things get extremely, extremely complex. The experiential, the software level, because we can learn all kinds of different things that influence how we would react to a certain thing. If you like, this is the really fun, simple line here. When you look at the immense variety between individuals, how they react to certain stimuli, where they behave differently, how they think and see and feel differently about different things, we all kind of have the same hardware. Of course, there is some variety, but not qualitatively too much, just quantitatively largely. The reasoning for all that change is the software level. It's the experiences we have. It's the things we've picked up. It's the advertising. It's the propaganda. It's the teachings that we've gotten from, family members or whatnot. And I'm not saying they're all bad, but we learn different things at a conscious level and at a subconscious level. And that can screw us up, especially when there's a big disparity between the two. So depression, understanding behavioral stuff, the nuts and bolts, the stuff that everyone's really getting screwed over by. Again, there's always more complexity when we're talking about beliefs, and that's always a part that comes into the work that we're doing. But there's relative simplicity to these simple behaviors. So with depression, we have to go right back to stress systems. We were talking about the mind and the brain, right? When we look at, depression, one of the first questions I'll ask is, what are the symptoms? Yeah. And you can go to the DSM-5, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual 5, which is the diagnostic book for mental health disorders. You can Google this stuff, or you can just ask somebody else, what are the definition or what are the symptoms of depression? And we'll say things like, and this is what the DSM-5 says largely, you feel tired. You feel like you don't want to do much. Motivation, essentially. The motivation is low. The things that you used to enjoy, you no longer enjoy. And you just can't use your brain. You can't think much. You can't do much. You're just not doing too much. And the next question I'll ask is, why would your brain be doing this? Or maybe I would have asked before, are you choosing to become depressed? They'd say, no. And I'd say, okay, then why would your brain be choosing to engage in all these behavioral patterns, right? Or these perceptual changes, why would your cognition change so much? And the underlying pattern of all those symptoms is they make you sit down and do nothing. Now, why would your brain be doing that, right? What does sitting down and doing nothing do for you? Well, it reduces stress. And we talked about that. And for the listeners here, I have my hands up. I'm doing the two bars again, stress and self-care and the relationship between the two. Sitting down, doing nothing, not being able to use your brain, not being able to move around. It's a great way of recovering resources, great way of using less energy and using less brain power. Your brain will quite literally, lessen your ability to think and focus when you're depressed. Now, again, people might say, but I have a job. I've got responsibilities. I have kids who need to be taken out. I have a paper that's due tomorrow. It's not a good time for my brain to shut down. And I say, okay, I get that. Your brain doesn't. Your brain doesn't care. What your mind, what you want and what your brain wants are two completely different things. Your brain thinks it needs to survive. You're spending too many resources. We need to hit the brakes on that a little bit. And I want to note, depression is a spectrum. I also want to note, I'm not talking about like super hyper clinical depression when it's extreme, and not that there's too much of a difference, but anyways, besides the point. Depression is like a brake, a lever brake that gets pulled a little bit and sometimes more and more and more. Again, the symptoms will feel a little tired. We'll feel like, oh shit, and you'll see these symptoms when it gets a little too late at night, when you have a bad night's sleep, when you're in a caloric deficit, the example I gave in our last last conversation, excuse me. When we have to have when a family member dies, it's grief. And when we have to process that, the physiological hasn't changed too much, like a flu example, but our brain, remember, stressors are things that cost our time, energy, and attention. Our brain has to be used so much to process through what's going on. If we were to say with grief, that's a huge stressor. And what do you see with people who are grieving? Depressive symptoms out the wazoo. Usually they get a little anxious and worried. They can't stop thinking about things. A lot of drinking, a lot of smoking, a lot of promiscuous behavior, a lot of staring at your phone for 10 hours, right? Compulsive behavior, more self-care, making that go up. And we're snappy at other people, more reactive behavior. All of these behaviors are typically going to have comorbidity. And the reason why we're talking about anxiety and depression is because they are extremely comorbid. They are one of your brain's first methods to reducing stress. So again, I know I know it's not good for you to shut down, not be able to think, not be able to get yourself out of bed, but your brain thinks it is. That's why it's doing it. This goes for mostly, let's say, because I don't want to speak in absolutes, depressions. And, it's like, well, I'm physically healthy and I've got great friends and family. Okay, then I want to go to beliefs. First of all, I want to check those boxes to see if they're actually correct, but I need to go to beliefs. Do you think that, the world's doomed and everything's going to go to shit? Are you consuming, 8 hours of, war footage and that's screwing you up in other ways? Because those are incredibly stressful. Do you just have a family member die? Because you're going to have to process through that. Those are all reasons that contribute to stress. And therefore, again, it's an automatic thing. You'll just get more depressed. Your brain will pull on the lever a little bit more. So again, depression, I overtalk that. It's the longest time I've talked about depression in a while because it's just so simple. I know that might seem silly to say, but it really is just so simple. There's too much stress. So the question becomes not, how do I stop myself from becoming depressed? The question becomes, why or what is contributing to all of the stress that I'm experiencing, what is contributing to my stress levels? And I know it's so silly. We think depression, I have to have negative self-esteem, or I have to just be going through a breakup. No, those are just examples that really touch on things the most. You have the exact same symptoms, just less impactful, less quantitatively less, when you have a bad night's sleep, when you're in a caloric deficit. It's the same thing. People often ask, well, what about suicidal behavior and suicidal ideation? For what we're talking about for depression, those things are extremely rare. Because what I've essentially said is everybody experiences depression. Again, you died a little bit and you're having the physiological symptoms of depression, psychological symptoms of depression. But we get them when there's more big punchy things that happen to us. And then we have some more severe symptoms. Also want to note, since I brought up the idea of suicidal ideation and suicidal behavior, very normal, statistically, to think about suicidal behavior, to think about whatever, to think about, what if I killed myself? What if I did this? Very normal. In fact, when I was working with the crisis line and other, mental health kind of jobs that I've had, years and years ago, thinking about suicide is not critical criteria of anything. Everybody thinks about suicide, truly, and there's tons of literature on this. But to have a plan and to engage in suicidal behavior, that's when you step in. That's when it becomes serious. That's when it's an actual thing. Thinking about whatever, it's whatever. Thinking about whatever over and over and over again and giving it meaning, that's a whole different thing. So again, on depression, overtalked it arguably. Any thoughts, questions?
No, it makes sense. I mean, again,
I love that line, man.
I've struggled with depression, my family. Yeah. It's a lot of the time, I think, therefore I am.
Mm.
And that's what happened to me when I was diagnosed with ADHD and depression at an early age.
Mm.
There wasn't a lot of, I don't want to say literature, but there wasn't a lot around it back in the 80s, early 90s when I was diagnosed with that. It was just like, well, here's what you have. This is what you're going to struggle with. And here's, I'm a kid. Okay. I have, therefore I am.
Mm.
And it became
Yeah.
a reason to think of, well, I guess if I'm going to have trouble learning, I guess I'm dumb.
Mm.
I guess if my family's sad, then, and they struggle with mental health, I'm going to struggle with mental health. And it always tends to be, I mean, you look at, and I'm not saying everyone, but you look at the majority of people in my life, and I've observed a lot of people that suffer with depression. They aren't the healthiest individuals. They
Yeah.
don't have good self-care. They don't exercise regularly. They don't eat good foods. They use some kind of form of self medication if they're
Mhm.
not already prescribed medication, which most people are, because they give that stuff out like candy now. Everyone's on something now. And if they are on something, they will usually self-medicate with something else that they can get access to easier. And that was how I regulated when I was young. And it went
Mm.
from drugs to food. Food was when I couldn't get access to drugs anymore in prison, I ate my emotions.
Mhm.
And the thing is it's like, until you acknowledge what the underlying issue, and you actually say, hey, I've got a problem and I got to fix it. I got to fix whatever it is that I'm dealing with, and know that it's real, but know that it is fixable. It's not that it's going to go away, but it's
Mhm.
manageable. It's manageable. That was a game changer to me.
Yeah.
And that's what allowed me to get away from food addiction. And I used my addictive personality, whatever you want to call it, right?
Sure.
I use it to become addicted to discipline, addicted to
Mm.
change. And it's like that addiction is always going to be there, but at least now it's for my betterment, my self
Mhm.
betterment, and it's not for my destruction.
Sure. You touched on so many interesting pieces. I've been taking notes here, and so many threads open. First, the depression as a kid. There. I have my own practice. I work my own way. I don't want to be representative or lumped in with a lot of psychologists or psychiatrists or other therapists that are doing things their own way, especially when it comes to diagnoses and medications and all this other stuff. Um, you know, truly, I'm not saying that there isn't a use case sometimes, rarely. I have to cover my butt here a little bit, but like to give a kid all kinds of medical intervention instead of understanding, why is he depressed? That's to say, what is stressing him out so much? That's to say, and we do this sometimes, right? Is he getting bullied? What's going on with him? Is he eating terrible food and he's constantly
How
inflamed? Is he
about the most
constantly tired?
frequent one? Divorce.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
Incredibly
holy
rupture of the
shit.
family. Talking about
Dude,
social stressors. Yeah. Talking about social stressors, that's incredibly stressful. That's survival. Like, that is survival. That's why people playing with divorce is such an insane thing to do to your children. Besides the point, we don't think about what are they eating, not just from a caloric standpoint, but from how like violently inflammatory it is to their body. Remember, when we're talking depression, I really, this is the main thing I want to get home here for all of what we're going to be talking about. But particularly for depression, when we see symptoms of depression, we want to be asking, okay, what are the stressors impacting this person?
Yeah.
And then we want to be covering the physiological, we want to be covering the social, and we want to be covering things that they might have learned, picked up, beliefs, which they're going to be tied to the physiological and the social as well, or self-identity stuff. But there's extra going on there. So things like bullying, things like divorce, things like eating horrible food, things like being sleep deprived because you're playing you're on your phone or whatever else during night. Things like not having friends to hang out with, things like I have to do work all the time, things like even doing homework before you go to bed versus as soon as you get home, having to spend your whole day as a child thinking about, oh, I have work later, oh, I have work later, oh, I have work later. Then you sleep and you wake up, oh, school again, and then it repeats. We're talking about stressors. That's the name of the game. These are natural behavioral processes that will turn on when the criteria is met. That's to say, when stress is a lot higher than self-care. Now, I've noted that's a dualistic relationship. Dualistic might not be the best term here, but when you're talking about stressors, but we can also look at self-care. Is this kid alone all the time? Does he not have friends? Is he not eating enough? Is he not sleeping enough? Is he not exercising enough? There are a lot of, does he not have enough enrichment? We always want to be taking care of self-care as well. It's just usually how I say it is, with stress, it's usually that there's way too much going on. There's so much fat to cut away from the meat here. Where self-care,
It's a good
I often do
analogy. I
look at
like that.
yeah, well, so wheat from the chaff, fat from the meat, right? With self-care, I do check in. I want to know one of the first questions I'll often ask is, how's your sleep? How's your diet? How's your exercise? Do you have time where you're doing nothing? Because we're overstimulated all the time. We never have time to free associate. That's a whole other topic. How are your social relationships? What's your outlook on life? Because those are going to be massive, 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 massive. But I feel I'm digressing here. Again, I just can't stop repeating. I'm happy to do so. We see the symptoms of depression or anxiety or compulsive behavior or whatever else we'll be talking about. And we want to go, what are the stressors impacting this person? Of course, when we talk about anxiety, there's going to be different treatment modalities. But if you can get stress managed, your brain will just push for that behavioral way of reducing stress a lot less. Again, if there isn't too much stress going on, why would your brain push for reducing stress? And that's what depression is. Do less so that you're spending less resources, so you're less stressed out. And when I start talking about anxiety, which might be, immediately after this, it's all about stress as well. So any questions on depression before I move to anxiety?
No, again, everything you're saying, and you said too, the check-ins. As soon as you said check-ins, I stress this with my clients all the time. As a coach, I mean, I started my business to get people in better health, right? I started Mind System as kind of my business of personal training. And as time has kind of progressed, the business has evolved, and now I take a more whole health approach where it comes the mental, emotional, spiritual, social, and physical health of the individual that I'm coaching. So when I ask my clients to do a check-in, I keep stressing this for my clients. Yes, this allows me to see what you're doing well, what you're managing, but also what you're avoiding. Right? Why are you avoiding? Why have you yet to hit this thing? Why is your late night snacking still in? Why are these things that we're trying to eliminate? Why are they here? And I hear coaches, I've heard trainers and coaches say, I don't know how to help I do this with my client and they just don't get it. I'm like, yeah, because you haven't you're just a health coach. So the reason why your client is still struggling is because you don't know how to address the underlying issue he's struggling with, because you don't even see it. You're completely blissfully unaware because you're just a freaking health coach. So stop trying to coach this person and pass them on to an expert, because this isn't going to get addressed until you have someone who actually knows what's going on and they can actually address it. Because the check-ins are not for me. Well, they kind of are, but they're more for my clients. I'm like, this is a mirror. And no one likes to look in the mirror when they're doing shitty things. So when I see people avoiding their check-in, I'm like, yeah, it's because you don't want to look in the mirror. Because you don't like what you see. Anyways, that's my thing. And now I would love to hear, and I know my audience would love to hear about anxiety.
Well, you keep laying me up. I want to get to anxiety, but there's some pieces I want to note there. Look at what this health, no problem at all. This health coach, as you're saying, look at what they're doing wrong. And this isn't to admonish any position or any individual or anything. It's just, someone who's in ignorance. What are they doing? They're observing a phenomenon. Why are they doing this? Why are they not doing this? And they go, I don't know. Or it shouldn't be that way. And it's like, no, there's a reason for it. We have to figure out what that reason is. I said this in our, not in the last conversation, but the very first one that we did. Everything can be understood. Everything is qualitative, or everything can be quantified, excuse me. Always be curious, try to understand things. And this is why, like, my approach to these conversations that we've been having and with the work that I do with clients is, here's how to understand these things. Go out and prosper, go out and do this self-reflection, go out and do these check-ins, try to
Journal.
learn more and more. It's just, if you don't understand calories, how are you going to understand weight loss, right? If you don't understand, yeah, let's keep it simple. I don't want to get too multivariate here, but yeah.
The last, and this is why it's so important. Anyone listening, go back and listen to the very last episode, the very last podcast before this one, because he explains brilliantly the mind brain, two different things.
Yeah. So
like
let's talk about anxiety.
That enlightened me so much that when I finished the episode, I went to my wife. She's like, "How was it?" I'm like,
"Yeah,
amazing."
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I love that you gave me the space for that too, because I might use this as a resource for clients. I'm writing a little workbook for them, which, it's going to take a long, long time for me to do so. But like, to have a resource of like, hey, if you want a recap of that first and second session that we had, like, watch this. It's great. I think it's great. Anyways, anxiety. So again, what do we want to do? Just like with depression, what are the symptoms of anxiety? Yeah. Of course, there are going to be physiological symptoms like sweating and feeling like we have to shit, or feeling like we have to pee, or feeling like we have to puke. But there's going to be, sweating, increased metabolic rate, of course, but increased heart rate, respiratory rate, all that stuff. But there's the psychological symptoms, which I really want to focus on. Not that the physiological don't matter. I'm going to tie them in shortly. But for the psychological symptoms, I can't stop thinking about things. I'm worrying. I keep going, what's going to happen? What are they going to do? Why is this going on? I'm ruminating. Are there any other that come to mind for you? Thinking, worrying, considering, asking questions?
For a lot of me, a lot of myself, like when I think of anxiety, I'm worrying. Depression for me, this is not clinical. This is just me. Depression for me was worrying about the past. Things I couldn't change.
Okay.
I would get hyper fixated on all the times I effed up, right? All my regret, all the things I held on to. As men, we're taught to hold on to things, right? And now imagine how much energy this takes, right? I'm making a fist for anyone again who's listening. But if you're holding on as tight as you can to the past, how much energy is expended. And no wonder we're sad. No wonder we're depressed. No wonder we're beat down, right? Processing. Like, just for me, where everything changed is when I just let go of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't still think about the past. It doesn't mean I still don't have regret and things, man, I wish I could have done things different, but I can't. And I've learned and I've accepted and I've healed and I've forgiven myself. I've forgiven others. There's a whole process to it, right? It took me years. We talk about the 10,000 hours. We talked about that in the last episode. Prison gave me, I think, 87,000 hours to become the best version of myself. When does anyone have that kind of time? No one. So don't worry if you're struggling for a year or 2 or 3. It took me 10 and I'm still learning and I'm still growing. Now for me, anxiety is the future that has yet to happen. And I'm thinking about it in a way that's most likely way worse than it's ever going to be. Like when I was sitting in remand waiting to get sentenced. Oh my God, I killed somebody. I'm going to do 25 years. I'm going to get to spend the rest of I'm never going to get out. I'm screwed. This is, well, no, I'm right now free talking about what was. So what I thought at that point, the thing that caused me a massive amount of anxiety, the thing that I really had no control over, right? There's certain things we can control, other things we can't. A lot of things we can't. So the anxiety was on these things I couldn't control. And that's why it's so important for me to manage depression, to manage anxiety. You got to be right in the middle of the two, and that's being present.
Yep.
And that's where self-care literally lives. That's my very simplistic, non-clinical take on it.
I want to add on to it. You say present, that's where we live. That's all your brain cares about as well, is right now, is how do I survive? How do I take care of things right now? I want to expand on, we'll get to anxiety eventually, but I want to expand on what you know, and I want to add on to it, like add on the clinical layer of it. Because the words you're saying have immense meaning to me from a clinical perspective. And I really just want to add on to that. So you're saying, I have depression. It's all about the past. And how I would frame that is you keep thinking about the past, over and over and over again. That's a lot of processing. So we'd say that's incredibly stressful. And that would lead to a depression.
Absolutely.
Always, whenever that occurs. But further, and this is a topic that would be, I was just talking about it at the gym today. One of my favorite topics is acceptance. And I'm really not trying to regress. It's very hard in my field because I'm very passionate about this stuff. But if you zoom out, like almost as much as you can, like for reality in our lives, there are two things. There are things that are inside of our control, and there are things that are outside of our control. And if we are spending time, energy, attention, focusing on the things outside of our control, that is wasteful. And what happens is we get stuck on that stuff over and over and over and over. We can't stop thinking about it. And that's incredibly stressful. It's like a runaway engine. It's wasteful. We have finite resources here, and we only have so much time and energy each day. So if we're stuck on things outside of our control, like physical insecurities, like the past in your example, like other people, and what are other people going to do? It'll be incredibly stressful. And these people will find, people who are hung up on physical insecurities, again, the past or others, governments and the news and all this other stuff, they will be chronically depressed and chronically anxious, and they'll have compulsive behavior issues, and they'll have all these other things because it's all about stress. Now, this topic, I'm biting my tongue to not jump into it because the idea of acceptance, in fact, I might. We'll get to anxiety, hopefully, but this is just too cool of a little thing.
No, do it. Again,
Okay.
if we got to go to another
Okay.
continue,
my
please,
thing?
acceptance, because acceptance was what saved me in prison.
Yep.
Actually
It's a complex
accepting
process.
where I was, because, it's like, accept where you are, and now it's time to just build the best version of yourself while you have time to build. Accept where you are. I couldn't change where I was.
Mhm.
And that was probably the most liberating thing I ever encountered when I was in prison. I'm not my past, right?
Yeah.
I might have to carry around documentation that says that I'm on parole for the rest of my life, right? I got to carry that with me literally 24/7. I have a physical reminder with me every day about what I did. Now, do I focus on that, or do I say, okay, this was a part of me, but it's not who I am?
Yeah.
And I can accept that this was the mistake,
Mhm.
and I learned the lesson, because my past and my actions, they don't define who I am. And the quicker you can accept that, the stronger you become, the more you can be present.
Certainly, 100%. The issue is, or the fun piece is, and this is what I'll be talking about, is how did it go from being a choice? It wasn't at one point. You were stuck, and then it was. And some people spend their entire lives not seeing, or not, because I don't want to make it seem like it's just about seeing it being a choice, but it isn't a choice to them. They are stuck on it. It matters so much to them. It has all of these implications. It has all of this deeper meaning. And, I'm kind of giving the answer away. What stops it from being a choice is that it doesn't seem like it can be. It has all this meaning. It seems to represent everything. It seems to matter so much. So let's jump into acceptance. This is a fun little digress. Well, it's not going to be a digression.
I like this, so go for it.
Cool. So, people get stuck on things outside of their control all the time. And everything in health lives in, I'm going to get in a little, not woo-woo, but this is nomenclature I usually use a little bit longer on. Health is in reality, in what is rational, in what, is actually happening. And focusing on things that are outside of your control, spending resources, spending time, energy, and attention on things outside your control is inherently irrational. It's inherently wasteful. It's bad. It's wasteful, bad. It'll screw things up, as we noted beforehand, right? So I'll say to clients, first off, like, you need to stop focusing on that stuff. And you need to be able to differentiate between what's inside or outside your control. How can it be a choice if you don't know how to differentiate between the two? And they say, yep, makes sense. How do I do it? And I say, well, here's a fun piece. There's only 3 things that are outside of your control. So if you can remember these 3 things, and if you can ask yourself, is what I keep thinking about over and over and over again, is what that is on my mind for like 3 hours each day, is this one of those 3 things? You've got the first step down here. So what are these 3 things? And I gave examples of them, but I didn't show the archetypes. The first, no, excuse me, I might have said the 3 archetypes. I'm all over the place here. Physical realities, which is usually going to be physical insecurities. Uh, temporal realities, which is to say the past. And the third one is groups, agents outside of yourself. So others. This can also be governments, individuals, groups, whatever else. We get stuck on those things. And what I'll note here is that for that third one, other people, we are kind of evolved to get stuck on it. And a very quick answer to that, which I'll expand on later, is other people were like survival to us. You know, again, from that first episode we did, or from that previous episode we did, we lived with the same 100 people our entire life. They matter to us. What they think and consider, what they're going to do matters, like truly, even if it doesn't make sense. It's like the group thinks that way. I got to think that way. I got to be like that. So we try to get into other people's heads a lot, even if it is to our chagrin. So let's go over some examples. You know, how many people do you know that have just been so hung up, and there's industries on this, on, you know, for men especially, on being short, on losing their hair, on having loose skin. These are the big ones that I typically see.
Yeah.
But it can also be with having, you know, a jaw that's like this, or cheekbones or ears or whatever else, nipples that are too big or too small, having too much of this or that. No, I'm not saying things like a pimple. I'm not saying things like body weight, because these are factors that we can change.
Yeah.
Or that change over time.
Things that are more hereditary and genetic that you can't do much about.
Yes. Simply, we're talking
Right.
about factors that are outside of
Right.
our control that we can't do anything about. And sometimes that's technologically limited. You know, and sometimes we have technologies to reduce, to remove excess skin, but the
Absolutely.
scars that they can leave behind can be problematic as well. And people don't want to deal with that. So we might say, okay, that's outside of my control. Even though I can have surgery, it leads to other things, and I would rather not do it, but it's outside of my control. We get stuck on these things because they matter so much to us. And I love working with this example, you know, with a guy who's very hung up on being short. You know, he gives it so much meaning. Again, if he didn't give it meaning, why would he care about it? Why would he be thinking about it? If it was like, yeah, it's just whatever, you know, who cares? He wouldn't be focused on it. So you ask, what do you put onto it, right? And he says, well, you know, this is, you know, men aren't going to take me seriously. Women aren't going to like me. You know, I don't look good in clothes, and, you know, nothing fits me, and this and that and the other thing. And there's so much that he's saying. And perhaps the biggest one for a lot of men is women aren't going to like me, and I have to go through rejection and all this other stuff. And when am I ever going to have a girlfriend? It's a huge need for men, right? Women. And that's what he's putting onto it. So there are a few things I do to help this guy, or to try to get this guy to the idea of moving on, to accepting it. The first one I like is radical acceptance, saying that sucks. It is shitty. You know, this guy's not pulling these stats out of nowhere. You know, women do like men who are taller, generally speaking. You know, he's observed a lot of these phenomena before. I'm not going to bullshit him.
There's actually a stat. Sorry to cut, like, not trying to cut you off, but there's a. I had a client who researched this because he's a shorter guy,
2 inches taller. Right?
So sorry.
It's 2 inches generally taller than the woman.
Yeah. So like, there's not just that, but for every inch, like, you're under 5'8" or something, you have to earn more money to be seen as equal than someone who could be a less earner at 6 feet tall.
Yep.
And I was like completely unaware until he's like, no, this is straight up like research. And he showed it to me. And I was like, what the hell?
Oh, yeah.
Like, no wonder short dudes are hung up on this.
Yeah. Oh,
I've never had to worry about that. So I've never even thought about, well, my height. Well, I'm above average height. I'm 6 foot. I love my height.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's just the perfect height. And I take that for granted.
You know, there's a fun little, this is like very evolutionary psychology, but it's like, why do women find what they find attractive, and why do men find what they find attractive? And this stuff is so cool, but what a digression it is. Women care about providership. You know, what can the guy give? Can the guy keep me safe? This is why in our previous conversation around self-esteem, women like guys who are bigger, who have lots of friends and social, like rich social relationships. They like guys who have a lot of wealth, and the guys who have a lot of skills. It's also, you know, because these are all tied to survival. This means this guy can take care of me. This guy is good. This guy is fit. And fitness in evolutionary terms is like the ability to live and survive and thrive and pass on. What are men so? And there's tons of reasons. Again, I'm digressing already. Men, what do we care about? You know, we care more about the physical, which that's going to plug into what I'm talking about. We care about signs of fertility. So men are much more generally attracted to signs of youth. so younger women. And this isn't all like definitive. It has to be this way. These are generalizations we
Of course.
bias towards this, right? We care about breasts, we care about hips, we care about butt, we care about weight, we care about hip to weight ratio, we care
There's a
about
whole
long
song
hair.
on by Sir Mix-a-Lot. I like big butts, and I cannot lie,
Well,
right?
all signs of fertility, all signs of health. Hair is a sign of health pedigree. Long hair shows you how healthy that person has
now
been.
I'm
Kind of
getting
like,
triggered.
what's that?
So now I'm getting
Sorry,
triggered.
for women.
No,
Excuse me, the other way around.
No, I'm just
But
kidding.
it's and there's something to be said about beards on men and like androgenization, but I'm not trying to get into it. Anyways, we're digressing. We're like 3 digressions deep here. Let me pull it back.
But it's still cool because I think we're all familiar with that. We understand the importance of facial hair for men.
Yep.
And even like you said, even like my wife has got probably the most beautiful head of hair. Because of her culture. And, her hair, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Oliver's beautiful. But yeah, you're right. Like things you don't tend to think of that are hardwired into our DNA.
And that's a really good connection to make. Like the way things are the way that they are for a reason, and they're tied to evolutionary psychology. Anyways, digression. In terms of the acceptance piece, first there's the radical stuff of, that does suck. Calling a spade. But what is inside of our control? What can we do, right? Yeah. I also might say, okay, well, how much does it? It feels like the be-all, end-all to him. Let's actually crunch the numbers on this. So I might say to him, okay, say I've got this scale here, and right now I'm holding up my hands. I'm doing a lot of visual stuff. We have this whole spectrum here, and this is going to be physical attraction. In terms of physical attraction, how much weight do women put on height? And he might say, well, probably like 30 or 40%. And I'd say, okay, sure, I'll give it to him, whatever. And then I might ask, okay, of that 60 to 70% that's left, what's in there for physical attraction? He might say, well, there's skin color and health and texture. There's hair. There's like musculature. There's weight. There's all kinds of features, eyes and ears, and all kinds of other stuff. And I might say, okay, and in what those, what do you have control over a lot of those? So, let's take some accountability. Let's try to focus in on those. But maybe that doesn't convince him, right? So I might then ask him, okay, say we have this new spectrum of general attraction for women, right? How much of that is physical attraction? And they might say, well, probably like 20 to 30%. And I'd say, sure, whatever, let's go with that. You just said 30 to 40% of that 20 to 30% was height. So in this whole bar that we have here, we have something this big, 30 to 40% of 20 to 30%. Right? That's a small chunk relative to all this. And then I might ask them, for relative or for general attraction, what goes into that? He might say, well, personality, friends, sense of humor, family, the hobbies and interests I have, charisma, fashion sense or whatever, a million different variables. And I'd say, okay, in that, what do you have control over? And in that domain, there's a lot. And we can get into the whole survival and tied into being a self-made man and all that stuff. So I say, listen, you're getting hyper-focused on this 30 to 40% of 20 to 30%, this little chunk. How much sense does that make when you have control over all this other stuff, right? And that's another thing that might help him see things a little bit more clearly. Again, the issue here is he's hyper-fixating and giving so much meaning onto this variable when it might not be very rational, when it doesn't make a lot of sense. He doesn't have control over it. A very protective thing, extremely protective. It's one of the big things that leads to health is general health is what is in my control? What can I do? What, it's taking accountability. What is under my control? In fact, another digression, it's a lot of fun here, is if you think about, and I really implore the listeners to follow along to this, if you think about the most successful people in your life, the people who are happy, who are content, who've got great relationships. They typically have their money in order. They have good jobs that they enjoy, that they're content with. Again, success, I'm saying happiness and content more than anything. They're just doing great in all these different domains. They are doing one thing, whether they know it or not. They are constantly thinking, what is in my control and what can I do? And I want to counter this to say, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. If you think about the least successful people that you know, People who are not happy, who are having mental health crisis after mental health crisis, people who, they're constantly making excuses. They're constantly blaming. But that's more of what they're doing. But to say they have their finances aren't in order. They're constantly having ruptures in their relationships. They're unhappy. No friends, no family, not good. Their jobs not going so well. They don't have a lot of direction. What are they doing? And I think the answer is clear. They're not asking that very protective line. They're making excuses and they're blaming. They're getting stuck on things outside of our control. And what do we hear them say a lot of the time? I'm not trying to demonize them as well. These people deserve our empathy and we want to try and fix these people up and help them out. They're constantly saying things like, "Oh, but my back," and "Oh, well, I'm short and it's not good. And if only I had hair, then the girls would like."
My genetics is
My
the one I
genetics,
hear
yeah, the
so
ice cream
often.
bowl that says my genetics, There's all of these excuses. They're also saying things, and let's go to temporal and other people. They say, "Oh, well, my dad, if only he was better, and I was raised in a broken home, so it's not, this was just bound to happen, and I can't do anything about it." They say, "Oh, the one that got away, and if only I went to school, or if only I did things," maybe some of these things, I'm not trying to be shitty here, maybe these are some of the things you were saying to yourself back then, before you found that path to acceptance. Woe is me, this sucks, it's not fair, whatever. They get stuck. What's even worse is a lot of aspects of our culture and society reinforce that stuff. They'll say, "Yeah, it does suck. And yeah, you're just a person who has anxiety, or you're just a person who has depression," these labels you're talking about. "Yeah, and actually it is all of this group's fault, or it is all of that people's fault." Things that are outside of your control. It does you no good to fixate on things outside of your control, to spend your time going, "What's going on in Ukraine? What's going on here?" Not that it doesn't matter, but you're spending so much of your time, so much of your energy on a conscious level and subconscious level. And it's taking energy and resources away from things you could be doing, from growth, from benefiting and being happy in other domains of your life. These things become like black holes. They suck us in a little bit more and more and more. And the more we spend on them, the more we think that we're justified in spending time on them. Look at how it transforms anyone's life to just do one simple thing, to think, what is inside your control? Okay, well, what can you do? Okay, yeah, all that stuff is going on. Sure. What can you do? What do you have control over? And then they find how good that side of things can be. Now, I listed those two different sides of things, but those are extremes, right? We all live on a bell curve, and most of us are in the middle here. We obviously want to be more towards the side that's successful, that's saying, what can I do? What is inside of my control? What a digression. What do you think so far?
Everything rings true. I mean, I wish people understood there's two words that need to be removed from your vocabulary. I can't. No, you can. You just won't, because it's hard. And that's why 95% of the people that I did time with couldn't change. Well, I'll say, no, they couldn't. They wouldn't. Because it's hard. It's hard. It means that you can no longer sit there and blame, like you said, your parents, your past, the circumstances. Because the thing is, a lot of the things that happened to us when we were young, we weren't responsible for that, right? That's something that happened to us. Those are circumstances outside of our control, right? Now, we use that to justify our behavior, but it doesn't excuse our behavior, right? And that's what happened with me. Is I was one of those people that could literally justify why I was doing everything I did. Well, I didn't have a dad, and I was abused, and I had ADHD, and I had depression, and when I had an excuse for everything I did. And in the end, again, the acceptance, right? What we're talking about was I had to learn that there are a lot of things I had to accept that weren't outside of my control, but my healing, that was on me. Me getting better, that's fully on me. No one else. And that's all that depression and those things. I'm not minimizing what people are going through, and I know you're not. We're bringing awareness to this. Is if that's what you can kind of take out of this, is you can do something. And I pulled something up that I was talking about earlier today. Is I think you were talking about a man getting focused on women, because again, this is something that I think so many guys struggle with, right? I had my heart broken and betrayed by someone who I thought I loved. And now that I look back on it, I realize that was a very toxic relationship. Not that she was a bad person, right? We were bad for each other. We were wrong for each other. So the fastest way a man can ruin his life is by believing the world created only one woman for him. And I can speak to the truth of this because I was betrayed by the first one, but I was saved by the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And then understanding that, yes, I do believe Joelle she was that one person for me. But had I closed my mind and thought, well, I had this happen the first time, so now I become a victim of circumstance and choice, both, instead of accepting, no, I was just the wrong person, and that's why I was with the wrong person.
Mm.
So in order to find the right person, to find the right woman, you need to be the right man. And it doesn't mean I had to have the right car, I had to had the right house, the
Amen.
right income. No, you can take that, you can shove that up your you know what, because I met my wife when I had literally nothing but what I had in my cell.
Mm-hmm.
Why she fell in love with me was because of who I was. So if you can become the right man, your height doesn't matter, your hair, your income. No, because you're hyper fixated, like you said, on this small thing and you're forgetting about everything else. You're watering the 20% and you're missing the 80%.
Mm-hmm.
Water the 80%, and guess what? That's what they're going to see. Anyways, that's my
I like it. And what I'd
take.
add on to that is, you know, I like to take the approach of, and to me, it's funny. It sounds like a more, when I say it out loud, it sounds more like a accusatory or negative thing. But to me, it's like, this is the truth. This is what sets people free. But it's like, you're just focused on things that are irrational. You're focused on things outside of your control. Like, it's nonsensical. Look at the error of your ways and then fix them. But again, this is like from a cold, clinical perspective. There's not a lot of fluffy language around it. It's just like, just look at the error you're creating. Like one of the things that I note to clients a lot of time is look at things as a function, like as an equation, as a bunch of different variables interacting with one another and leading to some kind of output. Like, look at how look like this line that you're noting of, or that you had noted, excuse me, of, there's only one woman out there for me. I imagine what helped you is actually staring at that line, actually looking at that and ripping it to shreds and going, what the hell does that mean? How can there be only one person for me? Has that been the case for other people? Why would it be for me? Like, really trying to be rational and critical about these things that we might say to ourselves. Imagine running with that heuristic. Same, this is harkening back to what we talked about beliefs early on of, believing that you're lazy. What do you mean you're lazy? You work hard at certain things, some things you don't. Are we just going to label you completely as this? You experiencing depression. It's like, okay, so now you're going to put this label on that this is just a depressed person. Imagine what that person will do with that. Imagine what downstream consequences that might have around certain things. Like, it's looking at the sentences or beliefs that we hold about ourselves and actually being able to think critically about them, determining whether they're rational or irrational is massive. If we're working with rules in our life that just don't make sense, I know how fluffy that might sound. If we're working with beliefs that are just inherently irrational, of course it's going to screw us up. It's like we're just playing life with like one arm tied behind our back, or we think that chess has to be played without like bishops or something. And it's like, yeah, it's going to screw you up. It's definitely going to mess up your game quite a bit. And having these
You
irrational
have to
beliefs.
you have to approach life with the mindset, the approach of a grandmaster, because
Yeah.
life is a game of chess, not checkers.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be thinking many moves ahead.
Yep.
And that was a beautiful thing about prison is it got my chess game up. Literally, I was
Mm-hmm.
playing chess all
Yeah.
the time in prison. It's how you pass the time in
Yep.
there. And it makes you more capable, it makes you more dangerous in the sense of it gets you thinking outside of just one move. Right? You're making many moves ahead.
Yeah.
And that's how life is. If you're just thinking, that's why goal setting, I think, is so important for people that have depression. Right? Start setting some goals. All right. Let's look at not just the next week, month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Who do you want to be
Mm-hmm.
5 years, 10 years down the road? How do we get there?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're just thinking in small quadrants or small sections, there's not maybe the urgency to realize that if you continue this trajectory for the next 5 years, you're not going to like where you're going to be. And that's what prison did, is I had to look 10 years in the future. If I don't do something right now, I am going to spend more than a decade behind bars. I could be here 15, 20, 30 years. So I better get my shit in order now. And that's why for me, when I created the kind of the program that I'm going to be launching soon, actually, for men, is giving men a correctional plan. Because when I got my correctional plan, when I walked into prison, I was given a correctional plan. I realized, yeah, okay, I better follow this. Not because of feelings. There's days I didn't feel like it. It's not about feelings. It's about what's necessary. And men need to get back to that sense of urgency. I think that this society has created just this softness. You talked about feelings at length on the last podcast.
Yeah.
Your feelings deceive you.
Yeah, certainly. They can be irrational,
Yeah. You can be you can feel unloved and yet be loved.
Yep.
You can
Your
feel
feelings are
unsuccessful and
not
yet be
rational.
successful.
Yeah.
Anyways, just
There's a poignant point you made of like constantly playing chess and having so much focus on like, oh shit, every step that I take, every move that I make has massive implications for things down the line. And that teaching the like the whole notion of cause and effect and planning for the future is like poignant. It's what I noted in the first episode we did around journaling, spending conscious time reflecting on what am I thinking? What thoughts are going through my head? How am I thinking and feeling about today? And asking why? Where's this coming from? That allows you to train introspection and deduction of, yeah, where does this come from and why is this here? It allows you to actually apply the stuff that, I might have noted in our previous thing around, okay, why would my brain be doing this? Why do I keep thinking about that thing? Why am I having these symptoms and why do they occur? So there's, skills. Doing stuff is good. Not doing stuff bad, typically, generally. So in closing up some of the acceptance pieces, although acceptance is such a broad domain, we also get stuck on things in the past, right? I can think of one client I had who had some drug-induced psychoses, right? And they embarrassed themselves socially. We had talked about depression, and, we talked about managing stress and managing self-care. And in the next session, he comes back and he says, yeah, I've been doing all those things and I've been feeling better. But now the issue that I'm having is I can't stop thinking about, this embarrassing thing that I did when I was doing these drugs. And I said, well, oh shit. Okay. Seems like you might be screwed here. You can't stop thinking about these things over and over and over. And yet when you think about them, they bum you out. They make you massively depressed. How do we square that? And he says, well, I don't know. And I said, well, have you ever thought about accepting it? Have you ever thought about moving on? This is something that's outside your control. You can't do anything about it. And there's that radical like notion there. There's going, yep, that sucks. That radical acknowledgement of that's unfortunate. That's a bummer. Yep, it did suck. Plus, he had done everything he could do. Perhaps there's a lot of parallels forming to, your previous situations, right? He done everything. He had apologized in the situation that he was in. He had done his penance, as it were. He, letter victim statements and community service and et cetera, et cetera. He did everything he could do. The thing that was holding him back was how much meaning he put onto it. And he was getting in the way of moving past this thing. There's some people who, again, I really not that it's a person's choice, because that seems like it puts a lot of agency on it, but it is in a person's power effectively, eventually, is some people do horrific stuff. They don't get hung up on it at all. Some people are very short. They don't get hung up on it at all. And then there's some people who do horrific things, maybe much less horrific, or maybe there are some people who are short and they get stuck on it so badly. It seems to be the be-all, end-all. So you constantly need to be going back to what meaning are you putting onto it. And for any of the people listening, if you're stuck on these things, That's the question you need to figure out is, what are you putting on to this?
Mm.
And what meaning does this have? Why does this seem like the be all? Truly run an experiment here. That's to say, why do other people who have the same insecurity or getting stuck on the same thing as me not struggle with this? And why do I? Do a compare and contrast. And all of this stuff applies to getting stuck on others as well. You know, why would they do this? And what are they going to do? And the government or this group of people or that group of people or, us versus them and all that stuff. We get so stuck on that. Why does my boyfriend, why won't they do this? Why can't they move past? Again, others are outside of our control. And that's terrifying. That's scary because those are the people we love the most and care the most about. Those are the people who might seem, or it seems like they have the most power over us. Yup, maybe. Depends, especially if it's a government, especially if it's other things, especially if it's a person we've given our heart to. We are powerless. We're outside of control. Yes, we can sometimes influence them or manipulate them, but to the nth degree, they're outside of our control. We can't do anything about it. Again, the question is, what meaning are you putting onto that dynamic or onto that relationship? Are you getting stuck on all the negative implications rather than refocusing on what can I do? What is in my control? Especially in these romantic relationships where it's almost our choice to give these people our hearts, they can screw you whenever. They can screw us over whenever, I should say, to be more clear. They can really ruin our lives. They can hurt us so badly. Yep. That's the cost to entry, playing that game. It's just the way it goes. Denying reality, believing in irrational things, saying that can't happen, that's not going to happen, tracking your wife or putting a GPS on the phone or whatever else for anything, even for safety reasons, but that's besides the point. There's a little thing to be said there. It's an antitrust exercise. It's not about accepting, you're fighting constantly, doing check-ins constantly. What are you doing? Who are you even with? Antitrust, not good. Acceptance, good. For the things outside of our control, acceptance is the only move. In fact, a lot of people might think about this concept of self-actualization, and prerequisite to that is going to be understanding what is inside or outside of your control and acting with that in kind. So what do we think? I'm remiss we didn't have time to talk about anxiety, but next
You
time
know
will be
what?
beautiful for it.
Next time.
Yeah.
But honestly, I f- I feel that people are going to take so much away from what you have taught us.
I
I've
hope so.
taken away more. So, just getting more insight, putting actual tangible structure and framework and understanding, which I think is why so many people struggle is why do I feel this way? And you clarified it perfectly
Mhm.
last episode, this episode. I'm going to be listening to them a few times just to continue to learn from you because I feel like listening to you, I think is going to help me help other people better.
Mm.
And again, and this is the other part of it is understanding that sometimes a lot of times you're going to need both.
Mm.
Or you're going to need one, focus on one first and then take the other approach.
Mm.
Because this literally is painting the importance of whole health approach.
Yep.
Because my problem, and this is where I struggled myself, is I put too much importance on the physical self-care. But the thing is, right, is you can only go to the gym so many times a day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have other means of self-care, like you talked about, then what are you doing? Well, now I'm going to go to porn. I'm going to go to weed, to alcohol, because they're forms of self-care, just bad, toxic self-care. So that's going to be our escape. That's going to be the way we cope and we manage. And yeah, I just wow is all I'm going to say, Casper. You've really, I think, enlightened myself. And I'm sure there's a lot of people right now that are like, yeah, okay, I got some work to do.
If I can add on to that, just to
Please
really
do.
speak to the listeners here directly, not that I haven't been doing that, but you can, this is stuff I said in the first session or the first episode we did, excuse me. You can fix what you're going through. You can understand it and therefore you can fix it. Try to do it yourself if you want. Absolutely. Do tons of research. Research, if I can strongly recommend, REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, and the tenets of that. That's a lot of the rational versus irrational stuff. It's so important. Start doing, everyone wants to talk about CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy. none of them, no one seems to ever read up on it or understand what it's really about. People even in my field, people just be dismissive like crazy. There's gold there. There's awesome stuff there. And if you're looking for something a little bit more light or fun, just because there's so many fun little factoids, last session or the last episode we did might have been really fun because of this. Research more into evolutionary psychology. There are reasons for why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. Truly, simple as, how could there not be? Start trying to understand it. Find the resources out there that you can utilize. Listen to more of these episodes, so that I can explain them, try to get them out there to you. I'm not trying to blow up your inbox too much, but if you've got questions, perhaps send them to Tyson and we can address them eventually. I certainly need to get through. I absolutely need to. I couldn't make a concession on it. Anxiety, because it's just so crucial, so key. And compulsive behavior would be good as well. Simple behavioral processes. But, they'll get a point to where we cover, should you invite me on some more? That's up to you.
Oh, you're going to be a reoccurring guest.
Lovely.
I almost feel like you're going to be a secondary co-host on on this.
I don't want to take that away
podcast.
from you and your friend.
No, this is, and it's so insightful.
Yeah. So eventually we'll get to a point where we can cover questions like that and quite readily, quite easily. Resource yourself. Always think, what can I do? What is inside of my control? I'm not saying in a macho way of take accountability, but live in a world where you are congruent with reality. What is inside of my control is congruent with reality. Spending time, energy, and attention on things that are outside of your control is not. Plus, when you find you're focusing on these things outside of your control, you're spinning your wheels, you're feeling badly, you're stressing yourself out, you feel like shit as well. It's anti-health to do that. It's irrational to do that. So all the best. That's what I'll say.
Okay. So Casper, you summed it up beautiful. I don't think there's really anything for me to add, but yeah, guys, if you have something you want to ask Casper, he will be on again. We will still cover anxiety. I think our next episode has to be about anxiety and cognitive behavior issues, which is another topic of discussion that I think will take a full hour to cover each of those individually. But if there's something else you want Casper to touch on, then send me a message, either in the podcast itself, or on Instagram or anything like that. Most people that listen to me are familiar with me. So reach out, let me know how we can serve you, our audience, better. So Casper, again, thank you so much for your time. It's been insightful. It's been wonderful, man. Thank you.
My pleasure. All the best. Until next time.